Okay, good evening. Welcome to the 2023 Watershed Congress. This session is entitled Tree Monitoring Standards in Action, Tree Checkers. We are pleased to present our first speaker for this session, Asha-Lé Davis. And Asha-Lé joined the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society in 2021 to pursue her passion for empowering people to grow tree canopy in their communities. Since joining, Asha-Lé has helped grow the PHS Tree Tenders program in Bucks, Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery counties to over 60 active groups who have planted more than 3,000 trees. Asha-Lé is a PHS Tree Tender leader in her own community, East Parkside, using her knowledge to educate her neighbors about the benefits of tree planting and care. Asha-Lé, take it away.
Thank you very much, Brian. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here, and just give me one moment while I share my slideshow with you. So as Brian mentioned, I am from Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, and I will be talking to you tonight about our community science program, Tree Checkers. I'm joined by some of my amazing colleagues and neighborhood leaders, Jill Sanchez from Ambler and Marcus Ferreira from Southwest Center City, who will be presenting about their work in tree checkers in their own communities as well. So before I go into the Tree Checkers program, I want to give some background about Pennsylvania Horticultural Society and the Tree Tenders program overall. PHS uses horticulture to advance the health and well-being of the greater Philadelphia region. We believe in engaging a diverse community of people and working at the neighborhood level, so empowering them to use horticultural to make a positive social and environmental change in their own communities. We believe that gardening and horticulture belong to everybody. And we do this by focusing on 4 impact priorities. Those are creating healthy living environments, increasing access to fresh food, building meaningful social connections, and expanding economic opportunity. We're able to accomplish these goals and continue to work on these goals through our Healthy Neighborhoods programs. So tonight I'll be focusing on our tree programs, but we also have our community gardens program, our stormwater solutions program, as well as our transforming vacant land and workforce development program. Our trees program focuses on increasing tree canopy by planting thousands of trees throughout the region through the programs. And by the region, I mean Philadelphia County, Bucks County, Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery counties. We have our Tree Tenders program. It consists of semi-annual trainings, both virtual, and we're having our first in-person training for the first time in 3 years coming up in May. You can sign up at our website, which the link will be provided in the chat, as well as at the end of this presentation. We also offer a bilingual training in Spanish in the winter. And through this program, we have trained over 6,000 volunteers to plant and take care of trees throughout the region. And I just want to highlight that Tree Tenders program is celebrating its 30th year this year. So we're very excited and feel very honored to be able to celebrate that milestone. We definitely wouldn't have been able to do that if not for our volunteer groups, our enthusiastic tree canopy growers who have planted all of these trees and taken care of and stewarded these trees. And last year, in 2022, we broke our record by planting 3,556 trees throughout the region with help from over 106 planting groups. Since the beginning of the program, we've planted over 25,000 trees total. And Tree Checkers helps us answer those questions. How do we know that all these trees that we are putting into the communities are getting the proper care that they need? And what is the overall survival rate for our tree and performance of our planting investments? So what is Tree Checkers? Tree Checkers is an annual summer program in which volunteers collect data on the survival, health, and stewardship of the new trees. My colleague, Mindy Maslin, launched a program in 2011 in Philadelphia after being inspired by Friends of Trees in Portland and their Summer Inspectors Tree Monitoring Program. In 2022, we expanded the program for the first time to include the groups in the counties. And PHS has been really fortunate to have a cooperative partnership with the United States Forest Service, Philadelphia Field Station, and their expertise in tree monitoring to help us refine our online cloud. Every summer, we ask tree tenders groups that have planted the previous fall and spring to visit every tree they've planted and report back on what they find. And our monitoring project is set up as cohort monitoring, the initial observation of individual trees. So the tree tenders groups coordinate their tree checker volunteers, and that's usually people from their group who are certified tree tenders, but it is not a requirement in order to be a tree checker. It can also be other neighborhood tree stewards. It's a great way to engage people in the community who have not yet heard about tree tenders and get them excited about the trees being planted in their communities, as well as university students or interns hired in collaboration with PHS and the US Forest Service. In addition to data collection, volunteers are highly encouraged to engage with the recipients of the trees because they are responsible for the basic watering and the watering and the basic tree care in the first 2 establishment years. Tree checkers may also use the visit to do a little tree care and site cleanup. While that part is optional on our end, because we wanted to focus on data collection and owner engagement, tree care, and because tree care does require additional equipment, we do encourage it if there is time during the visit. So what is the goal of tree checkers? One initial goal is a need for stewardship. As the Tree Checkers program has evolved over time in response to new program priorities, as well as emerging technologies with our collaboration with the Forest Service, we have found that there has been there has been a way to look at the program and pivot based on the findings that we find in data collection. And so the overall goal has always been to increase tree survival during establishment. In the early years of the program, the highest priority was to promote stewardship through homeowner engagement. We were more focused on using monitoring as a means of getting eyes and ears on the ground, looking after recently planted trees, and reminding the tree recipients to water and weed. And that is still a main priority for us. Another purpose of the program is to identify any dead trees and replace those trees that need more TLC. I do want to highlight that the replacement of trees is something that we're able to do in Philadelphia due to the permitting process, but is not something we are able to do in the counties. It does, however, allow county groups to get eyes on the ground and see any trees that are going through stress and then intervene sooner rather than later. So with tree recipient engagement, we cannot stress enough how important it is to engage those who are the receivers of the trees. They are the day-to-day caretakers of the trees, and the volunteer tree tender and tree checkers groups are there to support them. And so the way that we engage them are with one-on-one interactions in person or via email or both. We provide the tree tender groups and the tree checker groups with report cards that detail tree care tips and personalized notes about the tree and the type of care that it needs. So you can see on this tree checker report card, taking you back to school times, the tree checker will go and visit the site and say, you're doing great on watering, but you need to weed and clean your area. Thank you for keeping the ground free of any compacted soil and any and making sure that the roof layer is exposed. But we do want to make sure that the mulch is properly applied. And then they're able to leave their contact information for any further questions or for any further engagement with helping stewarding their tree. Another goal of the Tree Checkers program is the need for monitoring standards. We found in recent years, we've been focused more on robust and quality data to understand tree mortality, growth, health, and stewardship, and better inform the Tree Tenders planting and stewardship program as a whole. Thanks to Laura Roman, a colleague from the United States Forest Service, using her expertise, she helped develop the monitoring standards and help redesign the program that we're able to use today. So we were able to take volunteer data collection to a whole nother level, and now we refer to tree checkers as community science. We use those findings to guide our decisions around the program operations and the practices that we teach at our basic tree tenders class level. So managing this fieldwork, after we get all of this data, what helps make it usable data? And what's most important is having a clean baseline for planting records. And that allows making the data collection and analysis go really smooth. We have been really pushing for mobile data collection, and we do recognize that can be a barrier for some people who do not have that level of technology experience. And so we do offer paper and pen data collection as well. And in terms of equipment and supplies, we provide groups with measuring tape, safety vests, and in-person trainings, as well as virtual trainings, one-on-one trainings, and the like. We also provide technical guidance and remind group leaders for how to conduct their work, how to coordinate the volunteer field work. It's up to the groups to coordinate the volunteer field work on the ground, but we at PHS are supporting them every step of the way. And so with our mobile and online data collection, we've built in our monitoring programming using and contracting with Planet Geo to host our tree data and collection forms in a custom version of their tree plotter platform. That is a tongue twister, tree plotter platform. Some of the benefits of using this system is that it can be used on a tablet or phone. It does require internet connection, and we do provide the option to borrow an iPad and a hotspot from our IT department so that we remove that barrier for groups that may not have access to those devices. Another benefit is allowing us to map the tree over live imagery, and that as another layer of precise and specific location information. And lastly, you can visually see how to assign different field teams to trees and see the progress of data collection. We do have a tree checker form within the cloud that allows users to update the tree data live. They can also attach photos either with the device's camera or by uploading the photo later. We encourage this to allow further data verification. So this is what the tree checker form looks like online. As I mentioned before, you're able to easily attach photos to the tree records, which is very helpful for reviewing the data for errors and seeing the state of the trees live. We offer live and video training demos and a user guide for volunteers, as there is a learning curve when using new technology. Some volunteers weren't initially comfortable with using this, but more and more are coming around to using it with the help of one-on-one demonstrations and support from us. And with this tree checker form, it goes through the many different data points that we look for to see the tree's health, such as species, site ID, the crown vigor, circumference, all these things that I will go into later on in this presentation. And as I mentioned before, for those who are uncomfortable with our digital platform, we pre-populate Excel worksheets of the trees based on the information that is within the cloud for groups to check on. So it's a little bit different in Philadelphia than it is in the counties. In Philadelphia, we have the information ready and available and ready to go because we have to get permission from the streets department. In the counties, we rely on our groups to fill out a separate spreadsheet that we pre-populate with the information from the cloud, and then we're able to upload that information and download it again so that we're able to populate this spreadsheet here. With this spreadsheet, they're able to print it and take it in the field to transcribe notes. And when they're done, they can email the information to us to upload into the cloud, or they can work with someone else in their group who may not have been able to go out into the field, but they are able to do the work from home in their own computer. When our tree checkers are on the ground, as I mentioned, we want to support them as much as possible. And so we have an on-the-ground cheat sheet. This contains instructions and descriptions for recording all those different categories and what those different categories mean. So for example, on this cheat sheet, a tree checker may be looking at the mortality status of a tree, and they may want to look to see if a tree is dead or if it's alive. We have over here on the right-hand side a dead test cheat sheet that says lightly scrape the bark to see if it's still showing green live tissue. If so, then your tree is still alive, and it has a crown vigor of 4, which means alive, but no leaves are present. This is another example of that same sheet on the other side, and it gives them tips for how to properly measure the circumference of the trunk of the tree. And I will go into that more as we talk about the monitoring variables that we look for in tree checkers. So the monitoring variables that we have our groups look at are the location, which includes the address and site code, the species, the mortality status, the crown vigor, the trunk circumference, and some additional health and stewardship indicators. So our first two are our location and species. Once our trees are input into our cloud system, the trees are given a unique tree ID that's unique to that only to that tree. We also designate even further a site ID to specify the data. This is especially important when multiple trees are planted under the same address and street block. We give them a site ID based on the location to the address and the direction of the adjacent addresses. For example, if 1000 Maple Street receives 5 trees in front of the property, the trees would be labeled as 1F, 2F, 3F, 4F, and 5F in the same direction as the ascending addresses nearby, with 1F being closer to 998 Maple and 5F being closer to 1002 Maple. And then with our species, we expect our tree checkers to go out and verify those species on the ground. As I've mentioned, in Philadelphia, we're able to pre-populate the cloud with the baseline data. And in the counties, they provide us with the information. But we still want to make sure that on the ground, that information is absolutely correct, that the tree is still present. In rare cases, the tree will go missing, unfortunately, or that the exact location and the species matches the data, because we want the right tree to be planted in the right place. Our next few monitoring variables are mortality status, crown vigor, and trunk circumference. Mortality status ranges from alive. Our mortality status designations are alive, not planted, means that it was never planted for whatever reason. The tree was ordered and maybe the concrete couldn't get cut, or maybe the recipient canceled, but not planted, removed or missing. So the group knows that they planted the tree, but when they went back to check on it, it is no longer there, which is very, very rare, but still very unfortunate when it happens. Standing dead, the tree did not make it through until it needed to be monitored. A stump is now in the place of where the tree was once planted, or unknown. The tree checkers group is just unsure of what happened in that situation. And then we have crown vigor. And there are 5 classes of crown vigor, with 1 being the healthiest and 5 being standing dead. And the example of this tree pictured to the left of the bullet points, that is a 1 crown vigor. That is a really healthy, really happy tree with a beautiful root flare showing. And then trunk circumference. As I mentioned before, we give our tree tenders groups measuring tape in order to measure the trees. We use circumference rather than the standard diameter or DBH because it allows us to be able to provide soft sewing tape, and that costs less overall. And so those cost about $1 each. And then we also provide rigid measuring tape that costs about $2 each. But we still have them measure at the standard height of 4.5 feet or 137 centimeters. And we ask the volunteers to record the exact height of measurement that they use, and that enables us to remeasure the trees at the exact same height in the future to determine true growth. And so our additional monitoring variables, which are our additional health and stewardship indicators, we have them record additional pieces of data. This includes if the root flare is buried, if there's suckers coming up, if there's broken branches or bark damage, if there's weed in the pit or trash around, if there is not enough mulch or too much mulch. We really stress no mulch volcanoes. If there's dry soil, or if the soil is not draining properly. Essentially, we're trying to determine if it appears that the tree recipient is properly caring for the tree. And the last set of information for volunteers to record are notes about tree issues, maintenance actions, or follow-up needed for a tree. We really push for tree recipient engagement, so volunteers note on their data collection sheet whether they were able to leave a report card or spoke directly to the owner. For trees that are standing dead or removed, a replacement tree can be requested in Philadelphia and added to the next planting list. And it is something that can be requested in the counties, though we do not cover the cost for replacement trees in the counties. While it's not common, a tree checker may also note something wrong with the planting record, like an incorrect site ID, or the incorrect species was listed, or a tree that was never planted in the first place. That initial report may not have gotten back to PHS, but through this monitoring program, we're able to see that report back and take action accordingly. And so we collected all this data, and then how are we going to use it? As I mentioned before, this is a new program that we're rolling out in the county since 2022, so we have not been able to make a report quite yet, but they've been doing this work in Philadelphia since 2011. So after each tree checker project, we'll put together a report that is analyzed and summarizes our findings. And we'll use this info in various ways to inform the direction of our program operations and our teachings, even into the basic tree tenders class. So this data analysis includes percent of mortality by species, and that way we can get a good idea about species that do well or don't do so well in street tree environment, or don't do so well being bare rooted and going through that stress. And we're able to report back to our arborists and also nurseries and our partners about what trees to look out for in the future. Knowing which dead trees, again, can help us know which trees we need to replace. And if we see a trend in those dead trees, again, another reason to report to our nursery. One great example is we noticed that there was a trend going up of the buried root flare from 2016 to 2019, going from 23.3% all the way up to 34%. And with that, we pivoted our basic tree tenders training to really highlight this is what a root flare is, and this is where it should, how much it should be exposed from the soil. And this is the difference between a graft union and a root flare, which we found often got confused. We also realized that sometimes the trees settle after being planted. If for some reason the hole got dug too deeply and the soil wasn't tamped down enough to support the tree, it will settle after the water is poured on. And so we were able to change that education at our basic tree tenders level and saw a great improvement after 2019, going back down at 11% of the buried root flare. We also, using that buried root flare example, we're able to change how it's reported in our cloud. So instead of just saying it's buried or it's exposed, we went into deeper examples. It's exposed at the proper depth. It's buried by soil less than 2 inches or more than 2 inches. And another benefit of using the data and monitoring is it allows us to discover any errors in our planting records and clean those up. It also provides, again, that baseline data for any long-term monitoring. Our goal is to do repeat monitoring over the years so that we can do growth and mortality rate analysis over a long period of time. Because as we know or may not know, trees give us those benefits after living for 10, 20, 30, 40, after we're gone. And so we really want to make sure that we are keeping up with the data, making sure the trees are getting what they need, and we can do so by having these records be as accurate as possible. And so the lessons we've learned from doing this program so far is that good trusted standards lead to confidence in analysis and reporting the data. And through the data collection, we are constantly learning new things about trees and their stewardship, and it helps guide and improve our program, and helps us teach more effectively so that we can continue to build and grow the tree canopy. And over the last decade, we've learned that tree monitoring programs are not static. They need to evolve to changing goals and priorities. And I have this one quote from a community partner from PHS Tree Tenders that says, "It gave me a chance to go around and check up on all the trees, build relationships with the homeowners, and make tree health a visible activity in the neighborhood." And that's all for me. I'm going to pass it on to Marcus, who's going to talk about Urban Tree Checker and Southwest Center City.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me and see me? Great. Okay, so I am a tree tender with the SOSNA Green Tree Tender Committee, and I've been a tree tender since 2013, shortly after graduating planning school. So I went from planning school to planting school, and I've been an ardent tree tender ever since then. Shortly after graduating the program, the leader of my neighborhood group in the graduate hospital or Southwest Center City neighborhood asked me if I wanted to take over because she was moving to the West Coast, and I gladly jumped into it. And so it's been a great process, and to see how the program is expanded in Philly, in the suburbs, and also how this tree checking program has refined over time. Next screen. So while my group and all the other groups in Philadelphia have been planting trees and stewarding them by doing pruning clubs, despite our best efforts, there was a 6% loss of tree canopy between 2008 and 2018 per the tree canopy assessment report that was released in early 2019. And one of the issues was that as we were planting smaller young trees, large trees were going down as residential construction happened. And so I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but this middle line is the residential area, and on the left side, so in the middle, yep, in the middle there, on the left is loss and to the right is gain. So to the right is all the great work by the tree tenders, the city arborists, different residents who planted trees privately. That's all tree canopy gain, but that was all offset to the left by the canopy loss. The good news with some of that loss was that every time an empty lot that had some weed trees, so to speak, including polonias and ailanthus, that was considered tree canopy. And sure, they were sequestering carbon, but they're not necessarily the trees that we want. And then we also lost a lot of canopy in the more wild areas of the city, in part because of the emerald ash borer, and that's in the very bottom of the chart on the left there. Next slide, please. So PHS and the city came up with a priority map of where to address the planting and stewardship activities of the tree tender groups and also the city arborists. And what they came up with was a map of highest to lowest priority. And in this map, you can kind of see the high priority is like the real bright yellows. And then as the colors cool off, so to speak, they're low priority. So towards the upper left, and you can see some black area. That's basically where the Wissahickon is, and that's Chestnut Hill. It's a relatively wealthy neighborhood. Next slide, please. And what we're going to do is kind of gradually zoom in on these next series of slides. So the criteria that was generated was existing tree canopy percentage and also loss versus gain. Heat exposure, often where there's lower tree canopy, then there's much higher temperatures. Often in the same hot summer day, you could have a variation of roughly 20 degrees between trees in South Philly or North Philly where there's no trees and lots of concrete and sidewalks, and then the shady leafy areas out in the mountain area and Chestnut Hills of the city. Then also the expert mappers looked into health, asthma, cancer, and mental illness rates, air quality, often nitrogen and nitrogen dioxide, PM 2.5 and smaller particles, often near larger roads. Like, for example, my neighborhood, one of the higher priority areas was identified next to Broad Street, which is also County Road 611. It's a major thoroughfare. And so that came up in the map, and I'll show you that. Also industrial activity, historic and present. There's a lot of lead smelting in the past. In my neighborhood on the southern edge, Washington Avenue was a big lead smelting area. Traffic speed and volume. We know that tree-lined streets create visual sense of enclosure for cars, and automobile operators often feel less confident driving quickly if there's a canopy hugging the sides of the street. And then also socioeconomic indicators such as median household income, non-white racial percentage, violent crime, and also impervious surface area. Violent crime has been associated to increase in areas with less tree canopy coverage, in that often when there's an area that is tree lined, people feel more comfortable sitting outside under the shade. They become eyes and ears on the street. And then also there's just a general sense of this is a well-cared area, and this is sociologically a place where crime doesn't happen, and so it kind of doesn't. Next slide, please. So this is getting closer to my neighborhood. You can see towards the middle bottom, there's going left to right, there's Washington Avenue, and then also Broad Street going north-south on the right side. And then I'm sort of like in just the top left of that cross half in there. Yes, exactly. And so in my neighborhood, there really isn't a whole lot of high priority. If this map was conducted probably in 2006, my neighborhood had gentrified tremendously between 2000 and 2010. And then now below Washington Avenue, which is the Point Breeze neighborhood, they are experiencing a lot of gentrification now. And a lot of what you see in there, and also in the Grace Ferry to the left, are the higher priority areas where you can see that yellow. Next slide, please. So this is a blow up of the Southwest Center City area that I steward. And it's neat, as you go in, you can kind of see the trees popping up in the map. And then to the right is where Broad Street 611 is indicated, going up and down. And that's where you can kind of see some of the pink and the red, and that's in part because of the pollution from the cars going, the high traffic volumes on that 4-lane street. Next slide, please. So since this map is from 2017 to 2012, PHS created that map. And with what's neat is that each tree tender leader like myself has access to their own group's tree map. And so what I was able to do is kind of look at the earlier maps as a cross-reference to my own goals, and in general, which was to plant along South Street, which is sort of left and right to the top, which is a business corridor. And then also in the southern quadrant on the bottom of my neighborhood, which is closer to Washington Avenue and that Broad Street section. And as you can see, we planted roughly 118 trees in that area in 36 square blocks. And as you can see from the plots, it makes a difference. Next slide, please. This is a zoom into my neighborhood where we had lost 9% of tree canopy from 2008 to 18. And in part because we were a highly gentrifying area where there was a lot of construction. Next slide, please. So in this map, you can see towards the bottom center, I created like a little red area, and this is 2019 housing report where it shows development in 2018, and it's a one-year snapshot. And what you can see is a lot of developments happening still in my neighborhood, but most of it has moved south into the Point Breeze neighborhood where you see all those yellow dots. And so if we were to take a look at a snapshot from say 2013, you'd probably see even more development in my neighborhood. And that's one of the reasons why we had so many tree losses. So it's actually going to get easier for me now that my neighborhood's more built out. Next slide, please. And then one of the things that I'm interested in particular, and that what this tool allows us to do is assess the size of the trees when they're fully grown, and then also natives versus exotics. So there's a chart which allows us to look at the top 10 trees. And I've been asking the PHS specialists and tree specialists and also the arborists to plant as many natives in my neighborhood as possible. And I roughly guesstimate that we're probably around Doug Tallamy's 70% recommended rate for native biomass in an area. So, and then I'm using a very expansive term of native where I'll just call it at the level 1 Eastern temperate forest ecoregion. We're not getting too specific, make it pretty easy to meet. So like honey locust may or may not actually be native to Philadelphia, but as you can see, we planted 20 trees, which is almost 20% of the total of the 118. And it's a good guidepost for me to know, hey, moving forward, I need to ask for a few less of those. And then if you look, I'm pretty happy because despite the fact that most of the streets in my neighborhood are 8 to 12 feet in width, the sidewalks, I'm getting in some mid-sized trees there, the yellowwoods and eastern hawthorn beams. And then there's a lot of the smaller ones for the 8 to 10 foot streets. Next slide, please. So we've planted some trees, in the cycle, and then it's time to get out there and put the game hat on and the PHS Tree Tenders shirt on, get the tools out. So what we do, this is my colleague Emily to the right. We look at the trees and go through the whole process that Asha-Lé had outlined. And if you notice down below our feet, we have some tools. So what this is a first opportunity between a year and six months after planting the trees to go in there and give it a once over tilling, removing the weeds, So it's sort of a first, not only are we checking, but we're giving it a little spruce up as we go. And the trees appreciate it, and then hopefully it helps with the long-term care. Next slide, please. And then this is what we find in the city. A lot of our pits have weeds in them. So you can see this hackberry that we planted in front of the Stanton School is just really overgrown. And then a similar situation in front of a nice residence with the yellowwood. And these are the before shots. And then what I do is I always take a before and an after, and then upload it into the cloud so that the tree specialists at PHS can see what we've done. And then also if a homeowner ever asks them, we can say, well, this is what it was before, and now here it's spick and span afterwards. And that's why there was a few demerits on your report card. Next slide, please. And then not everything is neglect. Sometimes you have tree homeowners that really love their tree. And this is on the left. But if just from a glance, you think, wow, this tree's got a great future. It's got really loving tree parents. They've planted the annuals in there, which are an indicator to keep on watering, but without taking up too much, competing with the roots too much, like a perennial might in a small pit like this. They have a gator bag on. They created this nice protective wall, but then they did what often happens in the city, where in the suburbs, there's often mulch volcanoes, as Asha-Lé mentioned. Here we have the indication or the tendency of homeowners to fill up their enclosures with soil, and this one was about 8 inches. So we planted this at the correct depth. I have no way of checking to see where we originally planted if it subsided, but I do know that it's 8 to 9 inches under soil. Next slide, please. And sadly, it doesn't have a good future unless they excavated all of that. So here's a tree that we planted as a case study on League Street, and we planted it in 2018 in April, and then we go out to check that summer, so July or August of 2018. Next slide, please. It's a choke cherry. And so this is planting day. We're going in there. Jake there is making sure with that stake to verify that the root flare is at the correct depth. Then I take photos afterwards showing that it's been watered. There's a nice layer of mulch, everything's staked. And then next slide, please. And then, we did the checking, and then it was good. And then a few years later, after the initial tree checking, I went and looked to see, hey, is this now a candidate for pruning? And looking at it, oh, sure, yeah, it is. Look at the lower limbs. There's some broken limbs there. This is a bad angle, but some of those higher limbs are going right into the utility wire. And then I took a closer look, and then, wow, the property owner had left their lights on. Now the lights are growing into the crotch, or the crotch of the tree is growing around it. Next slide, please. So we set up a pruning club, which is the next layer, where PHS has trained tree tenders as advanced tree tenders with the advanced pruning certificate. And we went through and removed the holiday lights, and then limbed up the tree. As now you can see the trees above the level of the window. And then it's harder to tell from here, but although some of those branches are at the level of the low-lying wires, they're no longer touching or close to them. We remove the ones that are getting kind of close. Next slide, please. I think that's it. Yeah.
Great. So thank you, Marcus, for giving your perspective of what it's like being a tree checker in the city. And next up, we have Jill Sanchez, who is going to give us an overview of tree checking in Ambler with one of our county groups. Oops, sorry.
Great. Thank you, Asha-Lé. Thank you, Marcus. You can go to the next slide. Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Sanchez. I live in Ambler Borough. I was a part of our local Ambler Environmental Advisory Council from 2017 to 2022. Much like Marcus, a tree program through PHS that was already set up in Ambler was handed to me. My son and I planted 3 trees in a public park, and we were watering them, caring for them. And the former tree program manager said, "Wow, you really look like you like trees. Here's the program." I didn't know anything about trees coming into this, but I've really developed my knowledge about trees and developed a love for trees as well. So I have been Ambler's tree planting program manager for about 5 years now. It is a volunteer position. And in those 5 years, I have coordinated the planting of over 300 trees. Go ahead and next slide. So Ambler Borough is located in Montgomery County. We're 1 square mile. We're very small. We're about 6,000 residents, give or take. What's different about my tree planting program is that I work closely with our borough. I work closely with our downtown businesses, and I work closely with our residents. So we do plant in the downtown area. The borough supports us as far as removing trees that are dead. They remove Belgian block. They remove concrete so we can plant trees. So they're supportive of anything that we need. We do have to work with the downtown businesses to make sure that they want a tree. Sometimes it takes a couple times asking. There's this one tree location, perfect spot for a tree. And I asked no. So the 3rd year, I just thought I'd send an email just to bother her and see if she wanted a tree. And they finally said yes. So it took me about 3 years to get a tree where I want it in our downtown area. Ambler has 5 parks. We plant in parks. Our borough hall, we have a lot of trees planted at our borough hall, mature trees and new trees. We have a little playground there with a lot of trees as well. And then we do have some commercial areas. One of the recent areas that I planted in was we have a homeless transition center. Sadly, they got bad advice from a landscaper and cut down all of their trees. And luckily the borough partnered with us and said their landscape plan needed them to plant trees. So this past fall, I planted 7 trees at that location. So next slide. So part of our tree checker program, like Asha-Lé mentioned, we brought it to Ambler is it 2001 or 2021 or 22, Asha-Lé? 21, wasn't it?
21, yeah.
21. So we brought it to Ambler, and I worked with our local tree tenders. One of my tree tenders is my neighbor. So her and I worked very closely together. We planned out to go after work. We took one side of Ambler and we went tree checking. We had 2 other volunteers, more experienced volunteers, and they took the other side of Ambler. Very appreciative for their help. One of the things that I would like to talk about is working with the volunteer strengths. The 2 experienced volunteers, they just weren't technology savvy, or they didn't want to put anything into their phone. They wanted to data collect with pen and paper. But then what they found was challenging was the spreadsheet was really small. So one of our tree checkers brought his wife out, and she did all the documenting while they were checking their trees. So they were doing paper copy. Luckily, my neighbor and I had my phone doing the data input as my neighbor checked the trees. She's a tree checker as well. Tree checker and neighbor. And then our 3rd set of volunteers, this is a picture of them with our mayor. They're high school students. They are tree tenders. They're amazing students. Chloe John and Elena Wininski. They are involved. They're tree tenders and they lead groups of high school students. They're truly amazing. They had a very busy summer, but they said that they would jump in to do data entry. So they were able to take all of our paper data and they were inputting it in the evening. So in total that summer, we checked 56 trees and it was a lot of work, but we also learned a lot. The next slide. So this is what I would say we learned the most is that a lot of homeowners and a lot of, sadly to say, a lot of our tree tenders are still tying ties around the trees rather than loops. This was a homeowner tree. This was more than 2 years old. We just happened to be walking by it and we both had horrified looks on our face. So we removed this arbor tie. So that is something that with our last tree planting, I actually went out the next day and I drove around to all of our newly planted trees just to check them out and to untie ties and to make loops. Next slide. So some of the other things that we were working with is tree guards. Here you'll see on the left our junior volunteer. He's my son. He's helping us cut tree guards. Usually these are like deer guards, but what we use them for in Ambler is weed whacker guards. So all of our park trees need these because the Ambler Borough contracts out to a landscape service. So they just weed whack anything. So we have to have these guards around the trees. Sometimes when the trees are getting too big, what my son is doing here all the way to the left is he's cutting a tree guard in half and then we just double it up and I tie zip ties just to protect the trunk of the tree. We did see a lot of mulch volcanoes. I think a lot of education needs to be done, especially for our residents. And then we found some dry soil again. This picture is very meaningful. This is my son from the trees we actually adopted back in 2016, I want to say, 3 park trees. And then last, I want to mention that we really needed mosquito spray. This was like July, August, going into residents' properties. And yeah, we definitely needed mosquito spray. Just looking at time, there's one other thing I want to mention before I hand it back over to Asha-Lé. One of the challenges that we had is that we really needed to gain permission to go out and check our residential trees. A lot of these residential trees were in backyards. So we had to send emails and ask them for permission. If we didn't hear back from them, we knocked on their door the day of. And if we didn't get a hold of them, we just didn't enter their property. It was also important for us to notify the borough about what we were doing, just in case they received any phone calls about us checking trees throughout town. So that was all for me. Handing it back over to Asha-Lé.
Thank you so much, Jill and Marcus. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and listened about this program. Just want to highlight, we do have, please visit our website as well as come see us on social media. Follow us at PHS Gardening on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hashtag gardening for good. And if you are interested in learning more about this or any of our other programs, you can scan this QR code to find out more about our work.
Okay, thank you. It is about time that we wrap up our session this evening, but I wanted to thank all of our speakers once again for taking the time to share their knowledge and expertise. Thank you again and have a great evening, everyone.